Good day and welcome to MSUA's Game Changers Live, where we speak with satellite and mobile connectivity leaders about where the industry is headed, new technologies, and what you need to know about the future of satellite technology. I'm your host, Lisa Dreer, and our guest for today is Ram Viswanathan. He is the president and CEO of Omnispace. Welcome to the show, Ram.
Thank you for having me, Lisa.
Absolutely. Maybe we can start by having you just give us a little bit of background on yourself and Omnispace.
Sure, happy to do so. I've been a veteran of the satellite and the telecommunications industry, having been both in satellite as well as cellular communications. And it's really exciting to see a lot of the new innovation that's happening. And then we at Omnispace in particular are at the forefront of really driving this convergence between satellite and cellular communications. And I'm really delighted to be with you today and talk a little bit more about what we're doing.
Great. What do you see as the most important role that the satellite industry has to play in the future of mobile connectivity?
Well, in some sense, Lisa, the role of satellites hasn't changed much in a significant way, in that it was always meant to provide connectivity solutions for users in remote places, in particular, who are not connected to other networks. And traditionally, that's been the mainstay of satellites. I think how satellites are going to play a role in telecommunications in the future, however, is changing. And in particular, with the advent of 5G technology and a lot of other technologies, I think the role of satellites in an interconnected world, working with other network providers, is starting to change pretty dramatically. And I think we'll see that accelerated pace of change over the next 5 to 10 years.
Sure. I know at Satellite this year, there was a lot of talk about standards. How do you see that playing into that future?
That's one of the big changes that I believe is going to occur in the satellite industry. Historically, satellites have traditionally developed a technology and have a proprietary standard, proprietary user terminals, and provides a dedicated service. But we in the mobile world are accustomed to having interoperability. Fundamentally, you buy a mobile phone and you're able to connect it to any mobile network, and vice versa. That interoperability is the hallmark of what we see in the mobile industry. And I think standards are the key to unlocking that, which is fundamentally everybody builds, whether it be a phone, a network, applications, or other aspects of the ecosystem, to a common set of standards. Everyone abides by those standards as a means by which you glue this ecosystem together. I think satellite industry has traditionally never worked in that fashion. And we're starting to see for the first time satellite members and industry operators, amongst others, start to look at how to embrace those standards as a means of serving a broader market and being more effective in providing services to customers, much like the mobile industry has done for multiple decades.
Sure, sure. Are there other changes that you see coming down the pike, maybe in the longer term? I don't know, 3 to 5 years?
Lisa, I think one of the big changes is, as satellite infrastructure continues to get modernized with new technology, both not only the cost of the services is coming down, but equally the technology enables new forms of connectivity. So to give you one example, I'm sure you probably saw some of the rumors earlier in the summer around the ability to connect directly from satellite to, I think it was the Apple iPhone was the forefront of those rumors. But that really speaks to what the art of the possible is with today's technology. That would not have been possible years ago. And I think new infrastructure platforms based on these mobile standards are really going to create an interoperable network that enables users to be remaining connected no matter where they are. So this segregated connectivity platforms between mobile and satellite are slowly going to start converging, and really it becomes a ubiquitous connectivity solution that customers will be able to avail of.
Got it. Yeah. So, how do you see the commercialization of space playing into this? I know you kind of alluded to things getting more cost effective. Is that one of the outcomes from that?
It is, Lisa, and part of it is, tracing back to the history of the satellite industry. It really began with governments building these platforms, and we've moved into slowly the private sector. But I think that particularly the last 5 years has seen the acceleration of private capital and the commercial industry starting to kick into high gear in the satellite sector. A lot of the innovation is being driven by startups, which is very unusual in the satellite world. Historically, it's been large intergovernmental organizations which have held sway. And now you're finding startups with venture capital starting to see those scale up very rapidly and be able to really integrate those new technologies to create innovation and new services for the benefit of the broader commercial industry. And I think private capital and privatization in general has been a key to unlocking a lot of that innovation. And I expect that to continue to accelerate over the next decade.
Sure. You talked about the connectivity directly to a cell phone, for example. What sort of use cases would that kind of application support?
So, Lisa, I think there are two large groups of use cases. The first is consumer, and the second is enterprise. If we look at the consumer side, we as consumers are, I think, habituated to being connected to the network all the time. Sometimes we may not want to be, but we always are. And the reality is, cellular networks have their limitations in terms of the reach of the network. So satellites can play a very vital role in being able to deliver connectivity solutions directly to satellite, or rather directly to the cell phone or the smartphone. But you need to design a new network with interoperable devices where the phone can seamlessly roam between a terrestrial mobile network and a satellite global network. And that construct is relatively new. It's being enabled by the 5G technology standards. And we're actually at the forefront of doing a lot of that work and pushing the boundaries on it. But that type of infrastructure really has never existed in the satellite industry. And I think in the next 5 years, we're going to see some significant innovation in bringing that infrastructure platform and those type of services to bear for benefit of consumers. In a similar fashion, I think on the enterprise side, IoT obviously has continued to grow in a variety of use cases, be it in agriculture, energy, shipping and logistics, et cetera. But again, you've got some very difficult and expensive solutions that are available today where these assets really need to switch between being tracked on a mobile network and a satellite network. That builds in a lot of complexity, a lot of cost. And I think we're going to see those costs come down dramatically as you have technology which makes these terminals be interoperable between multiple types of networks.
Sure, sure. So from a user perspective, what do users need to be looking at, especially on that enterprise level? What is it that they need to look at in terms of the criteria that they're looking for from the service provider and or the hardware that they're using in order to make that connectivity happen?
So, Lisa, that's a great question. And for customers, they need to be looking at how are these networks that the providers are enabling been designed. If they are bespoke standards, standalone networks, you really are not going to unlock a lot of new value, be it from a pricing perspective or in terms of utility perspective from the solution. So you really need to be saying, can the network provider harness these new technologies? And if so, how are they doing that? And how are you seeing the benefits of the new applications that I can now do on a global basis? So I think the key issues are going to be standards. They're going to be interoperable terminals, and ultimately networks which are global and resilient that can provide that connectivity solution that particularly enterprise customers are looking for.
Yeah, yeah. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges to delivering the commercial satellite services to the market today?
I think the biggest challenge is that, as I said before, satellite industry is really not accustomed to working with these mobile standards. So the first is there's this sort of chasm where most satellite industry operators, as well as technology providers, really are not involved in the conversation around standards in the mobile industry. I think that's a relatively new phenomenon. You're starting to see a lot more participation, which is great. We've been very active in that forum, but would love to see more satellite industry, frankly, join that conversation around how do you take those standards and adapt it to a satellite network. And there are material differences that you have to account for. Satellites are obviously in space. They're not base stations on the ground, and there are a lot of other technical complexity that you have to deal with. So that, I think, is the first piece, which really has to be bridging that chasm and getting to the other side of being part of that global mobile ecosystem. I think the second piece is then really interoperability, because you want these devices to be interoperable between satellite networks and mobile networks. And that requires a great deal of technical work to ensure that you've built in that interoperability right from the outset. It is a native feature as opposed to something that you try to think about as an afterthought. Those two aspects probably are the biggest issues that I see as being critical to unlocking a lot of the capability that 5G enables.
Would that require new hardware within your smartphone, or hardware at the ground station level, or on the actual satellites themselves? Where does that happen, or does that happen in all of those places?
It does happen in all those places. The critical place it happens, though, is within the devices. So if you think about user terminals, be it a smartphone, an IoT terminal, all of those really need to be built on the 5G, what they call non-terrestrial network, NTN technology. And that's become a standard. And we expect that to start to be worked into the product lines of a variety of different devices. So in the next 2 years, we'd expect that available in mass scale. That's the good news. I think the next piece of it is really, as you said, all layers of the network really need to be fundamentally changed, and that requires new infrastructure. So satellites effectively now become base stations, just like they are on the ground, which connect with these devices. And the technology, 5G technology, really needs to be embedded in the satellites for that to become an effective network platform with global reach. And then finally, how you really operate the ground station and the core network to connect these devices, provision services, manage and track these assets, et cetera, all has to change, because historically we've lived in a very walled garden approach of satellite networks running their own private networks, essentially. And now you're starting to become part of the broader public network, like the internet and like the mobile networks as well.
Sure, sure. So does that mean that the satellites that have already launched, even recent LEO constellations that have been launching, are those already equipped with that 5G technology, or would we have to wait for additional new satellites going up?
You'd need additional new satellites, because all of the existing infrastructure, both the traditional geostationary infrastructure as well as new LEO infrastructure that's been going up, there are two challenges. The first is they really were contemplated and built before the 5G era. And then the second is that really they don't operate in the frequency bands that traditionally mobile phones do. So mobile phones use a certain set of frequency bands, and most of the infrastructure out there today does not work in that. And that's why at Omnispace, we're really focused on trying to harness both ensuring the spectrum that works within these devices with the standards to create new infrastructure. And we're on a path to doing that over the course of the next few years.
That's great. So what should we be looking for from our satellite services partner or partners?
I think partners are going to start to become a lot more responsive to these changing communication needs of customers, both consumers and enterprises. And a lot more activity will be seen, I think, in the satellite industry around the standards-based component of communications. So as we turn and look at satellite operators, one of the first questions I think most people will have to really answer is, what are their 5G plans? Where is it that they're going to be building infrastructure, technology, and applications over the next several years? Many, I think, look at that very narrowly, often trying to provide backhaul to cell sites. But really, the next big leap forward in satellite technology is going to be to deliver services directly to your smartphone, to your IoT terminals in a way that's interoperable. And that's going to be a game changer, a very huge game changer as we go forward.
Right. So if you're looking for services and support today and you're looking at making investments, it doesn't sound like this is quite to prime time yet. So how do I kind of, I guess, hedge my hedge my bets?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. My sense is that connectivity needs really need to be calibrated both in the immediate but also longer term. So as you think about making significant investments, for instance, in IoT as an enterprise, and really want to connect many, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of devices across your network, you really need to be looking at solution providers and what technology they're harnessing. Now, some of that, as I said, is going to take the next 2 to 4 years before those solutions are available commercially. But
Mhm.
the innovation is happening and happening fast. And so it's important not to get locked into legacy technologies, which will perhaps be very expensive to ultimately transition from to get to the 5G universe.
Sure, sure. Okay. So any other new technologies that we need to know about now or I guess in the near future?
No, I think the 5G is really going to be the first era of technology where satellites and mobile networks start to get together. I think you're going to see a lot more innovation on the applications of that technology in a variety of industries, which heretofore have been very segregated in terms of their comms needs. So my sense is much like innovation happens, the first layer is going to be infrastructure. The next piece, Lisa, is really going to be around applications and services. So the first 2 to 4 years is going to be focused on building the technology and infrastructure. And then the next portion of the decade really will be unleashing a lot of new applications, a lot of which we frankly haven't even thought about, which the technology enables. Once you have connectivity ubiquitously everywhere, you start to reimagine the world and how you want to remain connected with it.
Excellent. Well, I know from a consumer user perspective that I'm really looking forward to these technologies becoming broadly available because I like to spend times out on the water and out in the wilderness where connectivity is not great. So I'm looking forward to it to become consumer available as well.
Absolutely, Lisa. We hope to be able to service you and other customers whose needs are precisely as you described. You're often different parts of the world, and you don't have connectivity, and it's important to remain connected in this day and age. And I think that
Absolutely.
solution is going to be available fairly soon.
I can't wait. Well, Ram, thank you so much for being here with us today to share your perspectives about the future of satellite mobile connectivity. And we really look forward to having you back again as some of these technologies become a reality.
Thank you, Lisa, for having me. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Absolutely. I also want to take a moment to thank the Mobile Satellite Users Association. To learn more about the Mobile Satellite Users Association, please visit msua.org, where you can learn how to become a member and also receive our weekly newsletter. Again, that's msua.org. And we'll see you next time on MSUA's Game Changers Live.